Right. Hey, folks, it is Faz here from Fazlifts, and today I'm going to be giving you my critique of Stronglifts 5x5 and some ways that I would improve, and I'm going to end with an example workout which you can follow for strength. But before we get into that, if you have any questions or comments, please do pop them down below. The best questions I'll turn into videos like this. All right, so getting into this. Now, just to give you a brief history behind Stronglifts, Stronglifts was originally incepted around about 2007 alongside a rash of 5x5 routines, which was originally based in Bill Starr's work from the 1960s and was riding a wave of popularity from Mark Rippetoe from the early 2000s. It's primarily a strength routine, although people do still use it for mass, and it's mostly beginner-based, as seen by the emphasis on the power lifts and the big basic exercises. So let's get into it. Now, in terms of the first critique, there is a large volume discrepancy across the weeks. Now, I've just averaged this out across 1 week. As it is, we have a week A and a week B. So I've taken the numbers in total, and I've just divided that by 2. So in general, per week, the quads are getting 15 working sets. The hamstrings are getting 1.5 working sets. There's a massive discrepancy there between the front of the leg and the back. Chest is getting 7.5, upper back 7.5, and delt 7.5, which is reasonable, but it's a little bit on the low side. So you can see here we've got a couple of different problems. There's a huge amount of discrepancy between the front of the leg and the back of the leg, between quads and hams. That's going to cause some issues. There's also quite a high discrepancy in terms of what the volumes you're getting for the chest, upper back, and delts, and what is generally recommended as minimum volume for growth. Now, bear in mind, if this is a beginner to early intermediate routine, you need to be getting that volume in for practice. So that's first critique. Second one is this. The direct deadlift volume is very, very low. You've got roughly 1.5 or 3 sets per 2 weeks, so 1.5 sets per week. Now, if you keep the deadlift volume that low, you're never really going to condition yourself to be able to do deadlifts. That's going to stunt your overall strength development. You think about it from every possible angle. Every other lift responds well to grease in the groove. There is no reason why deadlifts should be any different, other than the fact that people really want to avoid back injuries, which is fine. But then that's why, just like with the squats and with the bench, you start low and you build up, but you've got to keep that volume in. Otherwise, you'll never be conditioned with the deadlifts. So that's the second critique. Third one is there's a great deal of very exercise-specific overlap in the routine. So there's high frequency on the actual power lifts. Now, the actual power lifts, by nature of what they are the lifts which allow you to lift the most weight. They tend to be the hardest to recover from. And the areas that I've highlighted here, the squats with elbow pain, bench with shoulder and elbow pain, tend to be the ones which cause the most recovery problems. And those are the exact ones which are getting hammered over and over again on a routine like this. Next up, we've got a squat bias. Now, whoever made this routine generally has a very strong squat bias. However, I can tell you from my own experience, I always did a lot better with far greater volume on deadlifts and far less on squats. I believe that some people are built more to squat naturally and built more to deadlift naturally. And this routine seems to be well suited for people who are built to squat, usually those with a longer torso and shorter legs. However, if you're like me and you have a shorter torso and longer limbs, then it's not necessarily going to do you any good. I would rather do more volume on deadlift. So this routine might be okay if you slot into that category of having favorable leverages for the squat, because there is a very strong squat bias at the expense of deadlifts. All right, now let's look at how I would go about improving these things. So here's something that I followed when I was well into powerlifting, so about 10 years or so ago. This is what I followed. So you can see that it's a similar layout. We do the 3 lifts, a push-puller legs 3 times a week. All right. So the actual time commitment should be roughly the same. Now on Monday, we start off with not a squat, but a knee bend variation. So something which is like a squat, but not a squat. And we do a press variant and a hip extension variant. Now, in terms of the rep scheme on that day, we use my over warm-up method. Feel free to check out my other video. I'll go ahead and link it above. Get an over warm-up going and then follow that by 3x5 working sets. The Wednesday is where we do the actual competition lifts. However, they are done for triples and they are done for light. Westside would have called this their speed day. I generally don't refer to this as a speed day because I happen to think when you're a powerlifter, you should try and lift everything fast. But yes, you should be doing these relatively fast and they should be relatively light. I would waive that percentage between 50 to 60%. That means you get practice on the actual competition lifts. You do them explosively and you do them for triples. So your repetitions are perfect every single time. That keeps you in the groove of the competition lifts without having to do them heavy all the time. And finally, on the Friday, we do the similar thing where we have a knee bend variation, a press variation, and a hip extension variation for just the 3x5. We don't need the over warm-up on that day. So here are some of the advantages. We use variations which are easier on the joints and recovery, which are more suited to your body type and which actually target your weaknesses rather than just smashing the competition lifts over and over again, which could be very difficult on the body and might not actually even address your weaknesses, and it actually may well exacerbate them and make them worse. We also use my over warm-up technique to prime the body to handle heavy weight. I believe if you're a powerlifter and you're training for strength, you should at least be in touch with how to do a single year round. It doesn't have to be a heavy single. And if you watch my video, I explain exactly what sort of percentage we're looking at there. The competition style lifts, you keep them in, but because they can be quite stressful, you ensure that they're done for light speed work. You just keep them in. So that way, with the over warm-up, you are still accustomed to heavy weight. With the competition style lifts done for speed, you're accustomed to the form of the competition lifts. On that day, you'd also use accessories as well. So like you might like a belt, maybe knee wraps, something along those lines. You'd really aim to lift just like you were going to lift in competition. Now, next thing is, with this routine, there's a far more even distribution of squat, bench, and deadlift volume. I mean, with the strong lifts, again, 15 sets of quads per week alongside 1.5 sets of deadlifts per week is just ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense. Here, I've far more evenly split the volume between the 3 lifts. And what I would recommend is adding in upper back bicep work as time allows after the session or in just a 4th day as a sort of a hit your weakness kind of session. But I would recommend upper back work and bicep work on this program. So to give you an example of what that might look like, this is very similar to what I did in the start of my final sort of powerlifting evolution when I hit my biggest numbers. Monday, I would do a high bar squat, close grip bench, and stiff leg deadlift. Those were lifts that I found to be very easy to recover from for my body. And I would kick those off with a over warm-up, followed by 3x5. Wednesday would be somewhat of a recovery day. I would do 5 to 8 triples, just waving them between 50 to 60%. Very typical of your old West Side, but I just called it my light day. As I say, everything should be approached explosively, so it's not necessarily a speed day per se. Competition squat, bench, and deadlift there, using accessories, so using knee wraps, using a belt for the deadlifts and the squats, using wrist straps for the bench, just trying to mimic the competition lifts as close to them as possible. Followed Friday by more variations which target the areas that I want to improve. So front squat, incline bench, and good morning. Now, bear in mind, your incantation of this could just be the lifts which you feel that you need to work on to improve your competition squat, bench, and deadlift. So if we just take the squat, for example, you may fancy a pause squat rather than a front squat. High bar squats are pretty universal. Most people would do well with including them in your routine. Also, with the high bar squat, the pause squat, and the front squat, you're not getting the hammering on the shoulders and elbows that you would do from holding a low bar competition style squat, which can be quite stressful on the shoulder joints and on the elbows for a lot of people. Same with the bench press section of it. Personally, I favored the close grip bench press. For me, that was magic. The incline bench was something I was very weak at, but it didn't have that much transfer over to my actual bench press, but I made sure I did it anyway for balance. And the lift which really brought up my deadlift was a stiff leg deadlift. Good mornings also did very well for me. So this is kind of where I would start the discussion for an intermediate, perhaps beginner level routine. Bear in mind, this is just an example. The actual routine would be a lot more flexible. And that's the point. It should be suited to you and suited to what your weaknesses are, what you can recover well from. And generally, when you're hitting lifts which you are weak at, your recovery should be better at those. So this is why the competition lifts tend to be very stressful, which is why I think it's just madness doing 15 sets of squats per week. So unless you're very much suited to squats, I just can't see it working for a large majority of people. Whereas this has got built-in individuality. So you're actually choosing the lifts which you are suited to. And that makes it a lot more powerful. Also has a bunch of other techniques like the over warm-up, plus the competition style lifts kept in for speed and a better distribution of volume for the rest of the lifts. So all in all, I personally think this is a far better way of approaching things rather than the Stronglifts 5x5. And this is something which I'll explain in more detail in a subsequent video. All right, folks, going to call it there. If you like my work, go ahead and give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. That would be great. If you don't subscribe, well, I can tell you that what's going to happen. I will have one less subscriber than I should have. All right, folks, take it easy.